You're listening to World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world. And here are your hosts, Aingeal Rose and Ahonu.
Well, you're very, very welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ahonu, and with me is Aingeal Rose, and we are bringing to you today the results of an amazing experience that we've had in the southwest of Ireland, in the kingdom of County Kerry, off the west coast of Ireland, to an island by the name of Skellig Michael. It's about 18 miles off the coast of Skelligs and 12 kilometres from the nearest port, which I believe is Portmagee. Now, we are very excited to bring you information about this because it is a place we've been planning on visiting for quite some time. And the Skellig Islands, they stand aloof in the Atlantic Ocean off Valentia Island in County Kerry. And from any angle or from any vantage point on the nearby ring of Kerry, there are spectacular pinnacles which have magnetized viewers throughout all of history and beyond. And indeed, one of the most visited places in Ireland is the Ring of Kerry, so where we're talking about will be familiar to many people around the world. They are world famous in their own right, but Skellig Michael in particular is known for its archaeology, as the site is a well-preserved monastic outpost of the early Christian period, and it's now in fact designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And the small Skellig is equally renowned in matters of ornithology as the home of some 27,000 pairs of gannets. It's the largest colony of such seabirds in the world. Now, a wisp of cloud often adorns the peaks of these pinnacles, creating a kind of a volcanic impression. It actually looks like a pyramid, in fact, popping up out of the ocean. But there's nothing volcanic about it. They're created at the same time as the Devonian sandstone of 350 million years old that runs right through the backbone of Kerry, forming the Kerry Mountains. And that runs from the southwestern headlands to the shores of Killarney's lakes. So it's quite a spectacular landscape. And ever since Aingeal Rose first arrived here, she was very, very impressed. Aingeal Rose, your impressions of Kerry when you first arrived?
Well, its beauty is just unsurpassed by anything, and it's wild. You know, Ahonu, I love wild places, which is why I'm married to you. I like wild. This West Coast is very wild, and it's beautiful. It's majestic. It's awe-inspiring. It's anything you can imagine like that. So, you know, we've been close to this area a few years back, and at the time, we planned on taking the boat over to Skellig Michael, but we didn't get an opportunity then. So this time, because of our Sacred Earth Waters project, it was definitely on our list as a place that we had to visit and basically get a water from. Now, I'll give people the true story, Ahonu, is that Aingeal Rose stayed back and Ahonu went solo on the boat yesterday. And the reason being is I didn't feel that I had the strength to take on Skellig Michael. I am a bit of afraid of heights, and this is an area that has 600 steps to the top with no railings or anything of that sort to hang on to, and quite steep. So I felt that it would not be in my best interest to take that on yesterday. And indeed, every time I checked in with Spirit, I was told no. Now, Ahonu, can you tell the people why I should not have gone on that trip yesterday?
Yeah, I think it was a wise decision, actually, because it's not the place for somebody who's unprepared. And what I mean by that is you do really need to be somewhat fit, and you do also need to be prepared, because bearing in mind it is off the west coast of Ireland, it is wild, and on the particular day that I went, it was quite choppy in the ocean. The boat ride wasn't really what you'd call pleasant. It was, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 foot waves, and difficult landing also, because there's only 3 places on the island where you can land, and one of them is only in use for the public. I say 3 places because this was so that the monks who inhabited the island up until the 12th century, they needed to have access to the island depending on what way the wind was blowing or what the weather conditions were. So they created all these access points around the island, but there's one only open to the public, and it can be treacherous enough really if that boat is rising and falling in the swell and you need to time your exit off the boat to get onto these steps. So it's really, really not ideal. It's not something that a casual visitor can enjoy simply because it does hold an element of danger, and it does demand somebody to be, alert and aware and able, not to say Aingeal Rose is not, but that the conditions in particular yesterday weren't ideal. And having said that though, the overall feeling from having visited there, even though the mist was down and you couldn't see the peaks, it gave it an air of mysticism. It was kind of ethereal. It was magical. It was really, really an absolutely wonderful experience.
Is that all you're going to say about Ahonu? Now, because when you got back, I was full of questions. I wanted to know how many people were there. So could you tell our listeners the rules they have about how many people can go out at any one time and the reason for that?
Yeah, well, let me backtrack first a little bit. You have to understand that this is a World Heritage Site simply because of the enormous amount of birds that breed on that island. Their puffins arrive in April and they breed, and I believe they leave again in June. So at this point in time, when we visited there were, I think, like 30,000 breeding pairs of puffins. They were all over the place. And not only that, but they weren't scared of humans either. You could actually almost reach out and touch them. They were so close and they were really, really friendly. But the earliest reference to the Skellig Islands dates back to 600 AD. And during the time of the penal laws, Skellig Michael and the Little Skellig became a haven for many Catholics whose beliefs and rights were being suppressed at the time. And the largest of the Skellig, Skellig Michael, was home to one of the earliest monastic settlements as a result of this. So these monks...
Those monks that were Catholic?
They were St. Finan's monastery, and they led very simple lives, and they lived in stone, beehive-shaped huts. And they would descend these 600 steps early in the morning and fish for the morning's breakfast, and would spend the rest of the day praying in the church, tending to their gardens, which everything was man-made, by the way, simply because the island is quite bleak in that sense. There's no kind of formal gardens. There's not a great depth of clay. And so they would have cultivated everything themselves. And the huts, which are round on the outside and rectangular on the inside, were carefully built so that no drop of rain ever entered between the stones. It's an absolutely wonderful thing to accept and understand that these people had a way of building and a knowledge of the weather that they were able to survive in such bleak conditions. But the monks left the island around 1200, early the 13th century, and then it became a place of pilgrimage. The bird life around that island, especially the puffins in late spring and the gannets, is a sight to behold. It's loud, it's raucous, it's the skies are almost black with the birds flying. It's really, really an experience that I would encourage everybody at some point in time to actually go out there and experience. Now, having said that, I'm going to answer Aingeal Rose's question because, you see, when we arrived, we had to wait a day, because the boats weren't sailing. The conditions had to be right. But as I found out, the boats hadn't sailed for 3 weeks prior. So there was a build-up, a backlog, as it were, of people waiting to get out to the island. And because it's a UNESCO heritage site, the authorities limited the number of people who can travel and the number of boats. Now there's 12 boats sail out to the island, and there's only 12 people allowed per boat. So to us, this was an interesting development in terms of the numbers, because the 12s for us are very significant. And anybody who may know us from listening to our radio shows and podcasts would know how we are 12-6 twins. But the 12 boats with 12 passengers leaves 144 people on the island at any one time, no more. And so 144 visitors or pilgrims were there at the time of my visit. And even that, it gave a sense that this perhaps was too many people. Now,
yeah, let's tell the reason why they limited that, because it didn't used to be that way. I think they did that recently because there have been people who have met their demise on Skellig Michael, falling off and dying. In fact, a couple summers ago when we were here, the boat that we were going to go on and we missed because we were late, remember, Ahonu? On that boat, I think an American woman fell to her death from the Skelligs. So there was a big hullabaloo after that. Remember, they shut it down periodically, and there was discussion about that maybe they should put up handrails and do all this for more safety. But then they decided no, that they wanted this World Heritage Site to be left intact exactly the way it was when the monks were there. So I do believe there's only a couple spots on the way up that have a silver chain embedded into the rock to hang on to, but the rest is all open to the outside. It's open to the bare cliffs. Is that right, Ahonu?
yeah, it's if you had suffered from vertigo or you were scared of heights in any way, then this is definitely not a trip you should take, because it does rise quite steeply up those 600 steps towards the peak, and there's sheer drop-offs on the sides of many of the steps. So it's not something that should be undertaken lightly. And also it's quite evident that there's, other than the beehive huts and the fact that there is a lighthouse built on one side of the island that has the mark of man's living there and the mark of mankind on the island. Aside from that, the UNESCO people really did not want to interfere in any way whatsoever with the nesting birds or the site itself. So in that way, there's parts of it that can be classified as, somewhat dangerous, but only dangerous to somebody who is, as I said earlier, who doesn't have their wits about them and maybe is being careless. But if somebody is, together and knows what they're doing and has some experience of perhaps hill climbing, then it represents an absolutely wonderful and joyful experience, yeah.
Yes, Ahonu, that would be me with the vertigo, because, with me being ill lately, I still wasn't myself. And I normally would have a fear of tremendous heights anyway. Well, heights where there is no guardrail or nothing, no wall or anything. This whole idea of a stair that has a sheer drop-off right on the other side would drive me spare. So, unfortunately, I did miss that experience, but it doesn't stop, many, many people from going out there. There are lots of people who go out there, and I have heard it's a mystical experience. But, Ahonu, it's also one of the reasons also why I wanted to go there isn't just because it's a very old monastic site, and it's beautiful, and it's wild. It's because it's on the St. Michael's line. So could you please tell our listeners, what is the St. Michael line? And if you know where it runs from, and to, could you tell people the spiritual, earth energetic ley line that's connected to this place?
Yeah, now I don't have all the facts about the St. Michael line, and I'm welcoming our listeners to point out or correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the reasons that this particular outcrop, this rock, this island was called after St. Michael is because St. Michael supposedly is the patron saint of high places. But I believe that it actually goes further than that. And we have seen references in the past where if you were to draw an imaginary line from St. Michael to, say, Stonehenge, for example, or the Hill of Tara, or various other places around the earth, they do connect up on an energetic grid, and one of those is the St. Michael line. So it was partly that reason that I wanted to visit also, because I wanted to really feel on the ground what that kind of energy was like. And I have to say, it is palpable, it is real, it is spiritual, it is ethereal, it's aesthetic, It's all of those wonderful worlds. It's a fantastic feeling of somehow being connected deep into the earth, but on a spiritual level, because the other side of it is one can feel very isolated, very alone. You can feel very much out of the perimeter of society. You can feel almost destitute. And I think it's those qualities that perhaps the monks were looking for, because they really wanted that Christ desert, as it were. They were looking for somewhere that would not be interfered with, where they could practice their belief systems. And of course, they weren't always alone, because the Vikings smelled them out, and they raided the monasteries. And in fact, there's a story that's told about in history about a king of the world supposedly was preparing a battle with the warrior Fionn McCool and the Fianna. And but the other story about the Vikings, though, they supposedly there was a Viking invader by the name of Olaf Tryggvason in 993, and he didn't fall prey to the seas. He was actually supposedly baptized by the monks on the island, and he later became a king of Norway. So that's an interesting turnaround, because most of the other stories about the Vikings and their invasions were very destructive, and they did raid the monasteries and persecuted the monks and so on.
Okay, so with your experience then, I have to paint everybody this picture. Okay, so of course when your husband goes off on a excursion like this, you're a little concerned, because it was supposed to be a nice sunny day and ended up being a very rainy day, which meant that, it was very slippery up on Skellig Michael. So, of course, you're always happy when your sailor comes home from the sea. And he walks in the door very quietly when he got back, and his hair was wind blown to the side. It must have been out about a foot in all directions. He had this weathered look on his face, and one couldn't help but giggle when you saw him, but also be very happy that he was back safely. But, we have been teasing everyone about our sacred earth waters, and we're almost ready to come out with these, because they will be things that people can purchase. However, Ahonu did create some waters from the energy of Skellig Michael, and also one from the monk's beehive cell on the top. So when he brought them home, of course, I couldn't wait to ingest the one from Skellig Michael itself. I took some late last night and waited. And I found that the energy was very subtle. It was not in a hurry to make its presence known to me. And but then I started seeing little visions of the cycle of life and death that occurs on that island and everywhere, actually. But it was very much showing me all the wildlife that was there, how they'd come to give birth to their young, and they'd stay a while and then they'd leave. And some lived and some died, and the same with people. So I was looking at this cycle of birth and death, and birth again and death again, happening all around the world. So it was, in a way, it was showing me this natural cycle of birth and death, basically as we know it now. Because I'm someone who doesn't believe that death is necessarily the natural cycle of divinity. But it is what we experience now with our particular state of consciousness. And then I was seeing that there was a part of this island that wasn't entirely happy, that people were walking all over it every day, and even not necessarily happy that the monks had come, because I was watching a vision of the monks being there, and then seeing these boats with invaders coming. I had to double check with Ahonu later to make sure that they got attacked on Skellig Michael, and sure enough they did, by the Vikings. But the island itself seemed to be very happy just to be itself and be at one with the elements and nature, and indeed was showing me how its very body was made from the elements. So I fell asleep with those thoughts in my mind, and then when I woke up today, I took more of the sacred water. This time, it seemed to let me in a little bit more, where I had a physical experience of this light going into my solar plexus. And it was like the sun shining in my solar plexus. And I was told by the presence of Skellig Michael that nature and the life force in nature and the life force in all the elements is what God is. That God is nature, basically, and it's everything nature creates. And it's got a diversity of forms, but this is the life force energy that runs through all of us. And I had a very happy, free experience with this water this morning, as if I was that Skellig Michael presence, and I felt exhilarating freedom and happiness of being out in one with God and nature. So that was my experience this morning from the waters, and it actually, made a point to tell me that even Ahonu and myself, we needed to appreciate one another more, that if we realized what we were each made up of, there would be a greater appreciation for the connection that we have. So that was quite interesting as well.
I took it too, and I wasn't expecting to impart my experience across the airwaves today, but I actually don't mind doing it because it was quite profound. Now, as an artist, I tend to think of things in terms of pictures, and so I'm going to have to try and attempt to paint a picture in your mind of what the effect of the Skellig Michael water had on me. If you can imagine a sine wave, now a sine wave would be like an S on its side, the figure of an S that goes up and down and back up again across a median line. Now, this was the image that was presented to me on taking the water, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't figure it out. What did it mean? And of course, I was thinking perhaps S was for Skellig, which is the Irish name for the rock of Michael. And even that didn't tend to make much sense to me. And then I realized that the up part of the S, as the sine wave rose up, was perhaps pointing to the height of the rock as it came up above the level of the ocean. And then as it descended down the other side, it went underwater and went down the same depth underwater and came up then to form the second island, or the smaller of the Skellig. So in that way, the sea level became the median line across the middle of the sine wave. And again, I looked at that and I thought, what really does that mean? What does a sine wave, why would it present a sine wave to me, and what does that mean to me or to anybody else? And then it clicked. The sine wave is actually a measure of frequency. And what I was actually standing on, when I was standing on Skellig Michael, I was partaking in the frequency of the Michael line, partaking in the frequency of the grid lines of the earth. I was partaking in a frequency of what I felt was connected to the likes of Atlantis and other various bodies of energy that we have been aware of for quite some time. But this was where it was tangible, where it was evident, where it was very, very real. And I knew also that I wasn't alone in the feeling, in this particular feeling, because several people had reported that there was a wonderful feeling. They couldn't put their finger on it. There was something deep about it. There was something about this place that connected them deep into the earth. There was something spiritual about the place. There was something mystical about the place. And there was all these descriptions. And I do believe now that everybody was describing the same thing. They were describing as best they could in their own way a frequency that they were feeling. And this is the quality that I believe is imparted into the water that Aingeal Rose now speaks about so eloquently.
Yes, and my feeling also from taking the water was that the being that is Skellig Michael was not anxious to just kind of pop out and give you a full experience of itself. It felt like it was moving slowly. It was an unfolding, a gradual unfolding, that in a way that it had its secrets, and it wasn't going to reveal its secrets to everybody. You know, it's almost like it, even when Ahonu got the water from Skellig Michael, he said that he felt that it took a while for the presence to actually come into the water. And my experience today was it was saying that it first was surprised that anybody would even be wanting something like that to happen. And then number two, to check out to see what the motivation was before it would impart any of its truth to the water. So this is the way I'm experiencing it, is it's gradually opening up to me. I felt this happiness in my stomach for a long time this morning. It was like a bright light turned on inside. And I felt that it was powerfully healing as well, and that it was a process that I needed to work with this water every day for a while to see more. I did get the sense that there is possibly a portal to another dimension in this rock someplace. Yet Skellig Michael would probably tell me, well, of course there is, in all things natural, in places natural, in places in the earth. There's many places where the energy comes together in such a way to create openings and leads into other mystical frequencies and dimensional places. But I think the most important thing I've gotten from it so far, almost like its insistence on how much nature and the elements of nature and the sun and the moon and all the other elements are God. They literally are what God is because it's life. And that it's everywhere around us. If we would only tune into it on the levels of its frequency, like Ahonu mentioned, we'd all be having much more tangible experiences of the earth itself and the power and the mysticism that's held within there. And the healing, by the way, because we know from working with all the waters we've been gathering over the past 2 years that all of them are profoundly different in their frequencies. All of them have such incredible information to impart, and many of them are profoundly transformative and healing.
So, as we draw to a close today on the result of our visit to Skellig Michael, just by way of a very, very quick summary, we found that Skellig Michael was built around 588 AD on this very, very steep rocky island, about 12 kilometres off the coast of County Kerry. And it survived a Viking raid in 823 and was significantly expanded when a new chapel was built around the start of the second millennium. It was abandoned around 1100 AD, and later on around the 1500s it became a popular destination for pilgrimages, but it never attracted any permanent residents other than the actual lighthouse residents themselves. And we also understand that in the late 1800s there was 2 children buried on the island itself because they were the children of the lighthouse keepers, and the conditions were so bad they couldn't get them to shore, and they died on the island. And after that they realized that it was an inhospitable place to live, and no further permanent residents ever lived there. Now, what else can I tell you about it?
There are guides that live there though for part of the year, you said.
Yes, there are 3 guides that live there during the summer months, I think from May to September. And they live in, fairly primitive conditions really, but they do nowadays, of course, have solar power for their cooking, and their conditions are somewhat improved in that sense. But they haven't impacted the ecology of the island or the visual impact of the island in any way. They're very cautious really to blend in to their surroundings, very much like the monks did all those years ago. And they also seem to be fairly ascetic. I spoke to one of them, and they were very conscious of the greater union with God and the significance of this particular place, and how they felt themselves too that they needed to be a particular type of person to withdraw from their life on the mainland, as it were, to this remote and very inaccessible place for long periods of time. So they were almost monastic in themselves, in their demeanour, which was an interesting observation, I have to say. Now, the lighthouses, of course, were built because that coastal area is quite treacherous, and those lighthouses on Skellig Michael did establish the importance in Ireland's maritime history too. But really it's the breeding seabirds that established Skellig Michael and the smaller Skellig as being places of enormous importance worldwide.
Okay, so everyone look forward to a video that Ahonu will be putting together from the footage that he took yesterday while he was there, and we will be posting a notice of that as soon as he has it ready. And today we're trekking onward, heading toward the Dingle Peninsula and the Blasket Islands in a few days to do more of our Sacred Earth Waters tour.
So that brings us to the end of our program today. Do stay in touch with us by contacting us on worldofempowerment.com. On behalf of myself, Ahonu, and Aingeal Rose, we say blessings. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Aingeal Rose and Ahonu on World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world.